In the heart of Africa's long struggle against colonialism, where nations dreamed of freedom and leaders emerged to guide their people toward dignity, rose Julius Kambarage Nyerere, born on April 13, 1922, in the humble village of Ujamaa, near the shores of Lake Victoria in Tanganyika. A child of Chief Nyerere Burrito, who would grow from the simplicity of village life, where children played in dusty fields and elders shared wisdom under the moonlight, into a man who would be called Mwalimu, the teacher, not only for the years he spent in classrooms shaping young minds, but for the greater role he played in teaching an entire nation how to stand on its own feet, believe in its identity, and embrace the idea that freedom was not just the absence of colonial rule, but the presence of justice, unity, and self-reliance. From mission schools where discipline and literacy became the stepping stones of his journey, to Tabora Government School and then Makerere University in Uganda, Nyerere excelled, but he also discovered that education was more than a personal achievement. It was the most powerful weapon to liberate minds, to prepare a people shackled by poverty and oppression to take charge of their destiny. And in those classrooms of Makerere, he was swept into the intellectual tide of African awakening, where young men and women whispered of self-rule, Pan-African solidarity, and the end of European domination, whispers that grew into a storm across the continent. His brilliance and promise took him further, winning a scholarship to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, making him one of the first Tanganyikans to study in Britain. And there, in lecture halls and libraries, he encountered Western political thought, Fabian socialism, and the philosophies of equality and cooperation. Yet unlike others who left Africa behind when abroad, Nyerere's heart never left Tanganyika. And in the quiet of Edinburgh, he often thought of farmers tilling fields, of women carrying heavy loads, of children running barefoot. And he asked himself why his people remained poor while strangers reaped the rewards of their land. And the answer was clear. Colonialism was a system of exploitation, not a natural order, and it had to end, not with violence alone, but with unity, organization, and moral conviction. When he returned in 1952, degree in hand, he resumed his role as a teacher, chalk in hand, guiding students in schools. But his vision was too great to remain behind a blackboard, for the classroom was only one part of the education his people needed. And soon he stepped into politics, joining the Tanganyika African Association, which he transformed into the Tanganyika African National Union, TANU. And under his steady, persuasive leadership, TANU grew into a mass movement, the voice of the voiceless, the hand of the farmer, the cry of the worker, demanding independence from British colonialism. Nyerere's gift was not fiery anger, but calm clarity. His speech is simple enough for villagers to understand, yet powerful enough to move crowds, as he told them that freedom was not a gift from the British crown, but a birthright, that their poverty was not ordained by God, but created by unjust systems, and that unity was the only path to liberation. And because he lived simply, rejecting greed and bribes, he became a leader people could trust, one whose words carried the weight of integrity. By 1961, Tanganyika achieved independence, and Nyerere stood as its first prime minister, later its first president. But unlike many who saw independence as an end, he saw it as the beginning, for the lowering of the Union Jack and the raising of the new flag was only the start of building a nation, and he envisioned that nation on the foundation of Ujamaa, familyhood, a philosophy rooted in African communal values where land, labor, and wealth were shared, where no one was left behind, and where self-reliance replaced dependency. Ujamaa became both his greatest dream and his greatest challenge, as he encouraged Tanzanians to form collective villages, to farm together, to share resources, believing that independence without economic dignity was hollow. And he warned against foreign aid becoming another form of slavery, urging his people to produce, to rely on themselves, to work as one family. And while the philosophy was noble, implementation was difficult, for not all communities embraced villagization. Productivity sometimes fell, and critics accused him of sacrificing efficiency for ideology. Yet no one doubted his sincerity, for he lived like the people, modestly, honestly, never enriching himself from his office. Tanzania faced hardships, economic struggles, droughts, the costs of supporting liberation struggles, yet Nyerere remained resolute, for he believed that dignity was worth more than borrowed prosperity, and beyond his own borders he became a guardian of African freedom, opening Tanzania to exiled movements fighting colonialism and apartheid, offering safe haven to the ANC of South Africa, to FRELIMO of Mozambique, to ZANU and ZAPU of Zimbabwe, to the MPLA of Angola, and in doing so he made Dar es Salaam a hub of revolution, a meeting ground of freedom fighters, a heartbeat of Pan-African solidarity, and though it angered powerful nations and strained Tanzania's fragile resources, Nyerere declared that Tanzania's independence meant little if its neighbors remained enslaved. As chair of the Organization of African Unity and as a respected elder statesman, he called for African unity, for resisting neo-colonial traps, for creating an Africa that stood tall, and at the United Nations he spoke with quiet firmness, reminding the powerful nations that Africa did not beg for charity, but demanded justice, that progress could not be measured only in money, but in dignity, equality, and freedom. And though his economic model faltered, his moral voice grew louder, and he was respected worldwide as a leader who led with integrity rather than greed. In 1985, after 24 years of leadership, Nyerere voluntarily stepped down, handing over power peacefully, becoming one of the few African leaders to leave office by choice, and in that moment he taught the continent another lesson, that leadership is service, not possession, that nations thrive when leaders know when to step aside, and in retirement he continued his work as mediator, teacher, and conscience of Africa, mediating conflicts like Burundi's civil war, warning against corruption and authoritarianism, always reminding Africans to value their identity and not blindly copy foreign models. On October 14, 1999, Julius Nyerere died in London, and Tanzania wept as villages and cities alike paused to honor the man they called Mwalimu, while across Africa and the world, tributes poured in, recognizing him as one of the continent's true fathers, a leader whose life was not measured by wealth or power, but by principle, sacrifice, and vision. And though Ujamaa did not achieve all he dreamed, the lessons he left endure, that leadership must be rooted in humility, that independence is empty without unity, and that true freedom lies in self-reliance and dignity. The story of Julius Nyerere is not the story of a perfect man, but of a man who dared to teach his people that greatness comes from service, that unity is strength, that humility is power. And though he began as a simple teacher in a small village, he rose to become the architect of a nation, the voice of African liberation, and the conscience of a continent. And for more stories of such giants, of visionaries who shaped history and whose shadows still guide Africa's present, make sure you subscribe to Shadows of Power Africa, where the voices of the past speak to the future, teaching us that the struggle, the sacrifice, and the spirit of leaders like Nyerere live on forever.